Okay, so this is going to be a simple tutorial on parallel lists. And so the way I recommend doing this is we think about when the player enters the world and we think about when the player exits the world. We are going to have two lists. One will be a list of players, which we will call players. And make sure to check the list and click create. Then we also need to know about their scores. So we'll create a number list, make sure to check list, and then type in scores. Okay, so now we have those two. So when the world is entered by the player, we want to add them in parallel to the list. So we just grab add to list, and we will add the player, or excuse me, yep, the player to the players list, and we will add either a 0 score, so number input 0, so if it like starts at 0, or we can get the user persistent variable for say score if we want to like have something like that. So those are two methods to set that up. Now I do recommend, we'll go with the 0 because it's easier to read. I do recommend double checking and that the player isn't already in the list. Oops, Command Z. And so we're going to say if the player is not already in the list, so we say not, and then we go down to list contains item. We can check that the list does not contain the player. I reverse these sometimes, so make sure to make list goes first, then player. Okay, so if the player is not in the list, then we add the player to the list and we add 0 to scores. Fantastic. Now when the world is exited by the player, we need to remove these two items from the list. We should once again do another if statement. So we'll go ahead and say if the list does contain the player, then we want to remove the item at index. So that's the index of the player from the scores list. So we're removing from the scores list first because we need to get the index of the player. So we say index of item player from the players list, and then we can remove the item player from the players list. And that is my preferred method. So now when you want to engage with this, let's say this is a trigger, for instance, that just increases score by 1. We'll say when trigger is entered by player, we're going to need to set their score, but the first thing we need to know is their index. So I like to create a number variable for this, which I call current index. We click create. And so we set current index, oops, Command Z. We're going to set current index to be that same thing we were just using a minute ago, index of player and players. So we can check the index of the player that entered the trigger from the players list. That gives us their index, that's the parallel index for both lists. We can then go to our list functions and grab set item at index and list. And this is going to allow us to set the score. So we're going to grab scores as our list. And then the value is going to be +1. So we'll go grab a plus symbol. And then we're going to grab the number input 1. And then we'll type in 1. And then the last bit here is we need to get the current value. So we say get item from list. And we will get the current index from the scores list. And it might be nice to write this out cleaner. So you might create another number variable called current score. And this is like, this function works correctly, but you could make it prettier and easier to read by saying set current score to be this section here. So it says set current score to be get item current index from scores +1. So we've got the current score, and then we set current score at the current index in scores. And that just makes it nicer and easier to read. So that is my recommendation. Hopefully that helps.